So growing up in North Delta and Vancouver and just the Lower Mainland in general, I think I was probably exposed to a lot of sort of older traditions because my family's been in Canada for several generations now, and my grandparents, like all my grandfathers, were really involved in things like wood carving and just working in their shops and tools and stuff. So I got really used to the idea when I was growing up that there could be things in your house that were homemade, or even just not one thing, but you'd walk outside and, your porch or your playhouse or your shed or the bed that I've lived in for the past 20 something years, even that was handmade. And I remember sitting there as a kid just holding the hammer while my dad was working on it. And I wasn't even doing anything but just being around those tools. And as I grew up, that's something that it sort of stuck with me, that idea that things you built yourself just really had so much more meaning to you. And coming into the School of Interactive Arts and Technology, I started in the media arts program, and I sort of thought that I could do animation or video editing or something. And after a year of doing that, I actually ended up with really sore wrists from sitting at my computer for so long. So whether or not it was an accurate decision at the time, I thought, well, I'll try design, because as vague as that is, it probably will involve less time at a computer, which is not necessarily true. But I started getting into this other way of looking at things where I could really start valuing a lot of those handcrafted things again, and really going over to Europe reinforced that. But at the same time, I think studying design here in Vancouver, where we have a lot of software and we have a lot of gaming, we have a lot of very objective things, you really start to use design as a tool to organize your thoughts and organize yourself and organize the things in your life. And just going over there, you can see how design is such a part of like the designer's lifestyle, that they use it to organize themselves in the same way, but it's almost like all of the useless observations that you might feel you make, they're very good at really exploiting. So it was really neat to go over and see places like MVRDV and AMO, where they look at all the functions of a city and they look at all of the things that a city entails and what it involves. And they start taking all of those disparate parts and sort of the useless observations that an interaction designer might make, or an industrial designer, and thinking of how those apply on a city scale. People like Jan Gill did this as well. And even going to KBC was really interesting to hear Lars Larson talking about designing products from the perspective of an architect and from the perspective of a group of three that are working in these very different scales. And a lot of those things really appealed to me, because when I came into design, my intention was never to just produce plastic objects. It was not to make things that were really mass produced. I originally started in this because I thought interactive art sounded really interesting. So speaking to Lars Larson at KBC was really interesting, because you walk into this office and there's architecture models everywhere, and you see Bjarke Ingels there and all of these people from all over the world working on these projects. And at the same time, there's people sitting at desks designing headphones. And just the fact that you could have industrial design occurring in that atmosphere, it really gives you a lot of respect for the design process, because you know that they're not thinking about these things as just objects that are produced and then thrown away. They're actually thinking about them in those multiple scales, even to the point where you could move just a desk over and have someone working on a proposal for an entire city. I think that way of thinking really spoke to me in terms of looking at all of the different scales of an object and how nested design is and how it translates through all those scales. So one of my main roles while we were away was to get context footage. So at a lot of the designers' studios, it was really interesting for me, because I wasn't necessarily listening to what the designers were saying. I was actually just walking around taking footage of their ideas, their process, and really trying to figure those things out on my own without having someone explaining them to me, because I would look at something and know what the final product or the final proposal was. But seeing it in between and looking at how an idea goes from the starting story, with Dick Van Hoff talking about just having one thing that you work at, or someone like Lars Larson who would take 100 ideas and boil them down to one really good one, seeing the differences in process there and meeting the people working on the actual things themselves was for me the most rewarding part of the trip.